on this episode of Therapy Bites Art Lab.
Neocortex is a place where we can rationalize ideas, where we can find optimism and love, where we innovate and where we create. But that amygdala is about the fight or flight instinct. And so if they terrify you, if the media constantly, in speaking to their niche, terrifies them about why the other side is a threat to them, you can't think. You can't be rational. You can't find a way to find common ground.
Stay tuned following the interview for On the Couch and Off the Rocker. Our special guest's psycho-silly analysis by Art Lab's own head cabbager, Dr. Ima Freudnot.
Welcome to Therapy Bites Art Lab, where Dr. Heath and his special guests share real-life stories of helping and healing, fresh from the actual therapy couch, while taking a bite out of common counseling missteps and misconceptions. And now, here's Heath and the T-Ball team.
In the Art Lab today, Mr. Paul Johnson. Paul, thank you for being here. I think it's fabulous, and we look forward to hearing your message. How did you get involved in this particular crusade?
Stay in the stands at the end of the interview, T-Ballers, and witness our special guest slug a bite-sized brain ball with your name all over it, clean out of the Art Lab.
Well, I've been involved with it for some time. As you had stated, I had been mayor of Phoenix sometime in the past. I also have been very engaged in the business community, and I'm watching the news like everybody else is, and hearing on the nightly news this narrative about how things are going wrong in America. What that's been doing is it's leaving people with a sense of pessimism. They think that their children aren't going to do as well as them. They think that China is going to surpass the United States, that we militarily can't protect ourselves, that our economy is in big long-term trouble. This is just the fact. There's no way around this. Here are a couple of things that are absolute facts. The first one is there's no better time, no better place to be alive than right here and right now in the United States. And here's the second one. We're an unrivaled superpower. There's no superpower like the United States. But one of the challenges that we're concerned about is this loss of agency that people are having, this sense that we can't do what we once could do. And part of our goal is to dispel that. The book, Addictive Ideologies, that Dr. Basha and I wrote, she had a different involvement. Her parents grew up in Iraq. They were persecuted. They were Jewish. They were persecuted by Saddam Hussein and the Ba'ath Party. They were terrorized. Her grandparents were murdered, and they had to escape. When you end up taking a look, and she and I did for this book, we took a look at how does that happen? How do people end up being in this position where authoritarians begin to rule, where people begin to lose their sense of agency, where people are willing to take part in heinous crimes against people? The answer is it still comes back down to agency, and that's really what the book talks about.
Explain that, because I know folks are going to want to know, how would you define agency?
So agency is your ability to be able to determine, to make decisions, and that how those decisions then determine your own destiny, that you play a role in that process. It's kind of it boils down to a set of what we call 7 ideals for citizenship. Those include knowing the truth, making certain that you understand that you're an individual. And the good news is you're unique, but at the same time, you also have to be accountable for the things that you do. You have to be accountable for yourself. It's about finding meaning, finding love, believing in who it is that we are, and recognizing that you're a part of something really wonderful in this country.
Do you think that everybody has that, though?
Oh, I do. Just imagine this for a moment. When I was growing up, I remember in 1969, that ages me somewhat. I'm 62 years old today. I remember growing up, and I remember running home literally every single day because we were going to the moon. Now, I had a chance to meet with some members in a roundtable with reporters who were working with CNN, and they were doing this job of defending the things that they were putting up on television. So I told them about my experience. I own a healthcare company, a company called Redirect Health. I had to go home every day for about a week and create a spreadsheet. On the spreadsheet that I had to create, it had a lot going on with it. It was pretty technical. So I went in and I turned on the television set, put on CNN, but turned the volume off. Well, for literally most of the beginning of that week, all day long, all I heard was how our country was falling apart. All I heard was about what was going on with the Trump administration and the investigations that were going on in the Capitol riots. So I went ahead and I turned it over to Fox News. There, the only thing I heard was about all these billions of people that were coming into the United States and how we were being invaded by immigrants. Now, here's the point I want to make to you. In 1969, I could tell you the name of every single one of the astronauts that went into outer space. I could tell you the names of their spouses at 9 years old. I could tell you about some of the engineers. I watched the takeoff and the countdown. I watched the capsule flip around in space and us land on the moon. When I brought this up to the reporters, they said, well, that's not a fair comparison because there are different issues taking place today. And I said, okay, maybe. I said, but let me tell you what I saw on Thursday at 3:00. Thursday at 3:00 for about 3 minutes, you put up William Shatner. Because William Shatner was inside a spacecraft, the guy who used to be Captain Kirk in Star Trek, and he had gone into outer space with 3 other people. Now, here's a spacecraft, part of a space race of 2 private sector companies one of them's trying to figure out how to get to Mars. You could have done the countdown. You could have given us things about the astronaut. You could have talked about all the great things that were going on with technology and how for the first time in world history, the private sector was putting people into outer space. You gave it 3 minutes.
Oh, wow.
I'm not saying that the things that they're talking about are a lie, but they're so out of perspective, they're not the truth either, right? There are many, many great things that are going on in this country that we just simply aren't paying attention to. I mean, I can go through them, but the idea that China is going to pass us up as a superpower, that's been the narrative now for 5 years. Well, if you look at China, first, they have a huge demographic problem. They have an inverted demographic curve where there are too many young people, not enough young people being able to be there to feed the older people. And we know that those demographics are going to get worse. The estimates are by the United Nations, they're going to go from about 1.2 billion to 700 million people by 2100. The United States, the opposite is happening. In fact, in the United States, we're one of the only major powers where our workforce is going to grow. They're going to lose somewhere near 300 million workers. We're going to gain them. If you look at our geography, you couldn't ask to be in a better geographical position. In both China and Russia, they're surrounded by enemies. I mean, think about China. China's in a position where they have Korea on one side, they have Taiwan on another, they have Vietnam on another, and they have Japan on another. While their military is about twice the size of ours, which is one of the things that they use, which is a terrible gauge, while it's about twice the size of ours, half of their people in the military spend their time guarding the borders. In the United States, we have Canada on one side, Mexico on the other, the Pacific, the Atlantic on another. You couldn't, if you were going to design an economic fortress, you couldn't have built one better than the United States. We don't need the rest of the world for trade. I think that we should take part in trade, but we have enough gas for ourselves. We have enough oil for ourselves. Look at the food production, just to give you an idea. 1 in 3 workers in China, 1 in 3 works in agriculture, and they're the largest importer of food products in the world. In the United States, 1% of our workers work in agriculture. Again, they're 1 in 3. We're 1%. And we're the greatest exporter of agricultural goods in the world. The United States, bar none, is in the best economic position of any nation in the world, certainly for the next 10 years, and I'd tell you for the next century. The idea of how's it going to go for your children? Bet on this. You're in the United States of America. Your children, if they get a good education and if they're willing to work hard, are going to do better than you did. And we're doing better than our parents did. I used to say to people in Phoenix all the time, people would come here and in the beginning they'd say, oh my gosh, this is paradise. But give it about 10 years, they'd start to say, well, they'd compare it to some fictional place. They forget, right? It's easy to forget. Because we're in the United States, we only really compare ourselves to ourselves. Even this issue of how divided we are. I can tell you, I've been in politics for almost 40 years. Now, I'm in business, but I was mayor for about 10 years. I've worked and helped run presidential campaigns. We've always had divisions here in the United States, but we're not polarized.
What's the difference?
The media will do this little trick with you. They'll say, hey, we've done some polling, and we found in talking to people on each side of the political aisle that 90% of them say that if their daughter, they'd ask a Democrat, if your daughter were going to marry someone you found out they were a Trump person, would you oppose it? About 90% say yes. They would then ask Republicans, okay, your son decides to get married and he decides to marry a Hillary Clinton person. Are you opposed to it? About 90% would say yes. All right, we'll start with this. They're polling the people who are the high efficacy voters in a primary. I could do the math for you if you would like, but take my word for it. It's about 6% of the public vote in a Republican primary and about 6% of the people vote in a Democratic primary. They only have about a 35% turnout inside the primaries. And remember, 44% of all voters are registered as independents. Those independents aren't getting polled at all, right? And then they're only polling the people who are the most polarized, because the people who show up in primaries tend to be a little more polarized. But more importantly, if you change the question and you ask even that group of people, you say, okay, so your daughter is in love with someone and they're a hard worker and they're getting a great education and they're a Trump supporter. All of a sudden, the Democrats' opposition goes way down. And the same thing's true on the Republican side. The question is skewed, and they're skewed to who they're asking it to. And it's doing what it's designed to do. Look, the negative bias works. That's the challenge. So political parties, political candidates, and the news media, they try to sell to it. It's called the amygdala hijack.
Good for you. I'm glad you brought that up.
The neocortex is a place where we can rationalize ideas, where we can find optimism and love, where we innovate and where we create. But that amygdala is about the fight or flight instinct. And so if they terrify you, if the media constantly, in speaking to their niche, terrifies them about why the other side is a threat to them, you can't think. You can't be rational. You can't find a way to find common ground. I get it. They make a lot of money by doing that. They get people to watch their news station. I get it. Social media sells a lot of ads based upon that. I get it. Candidates get elected. But it's not the truth because it's out of perspective. You have to step away from that to understand that. If you begin to understand the truth, you can get to the next part. And here's the next part: accountability. Each one of us has good and evil inside of us. I love the story of Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Alexander was he was in the Communist Party. He ended up going to the front with Germany, was put in a prisoner of war camp there. And then when he came back, they weren't sure what to do with him, so they put him in a prisoner of war camp in a gulag. The estimates were that somewhere about 1 in 6 people that were Russians went into the gulag, and about 25% of them died, at least by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. And if that's true, it killed 50 to 60 million people.
Oh, my.
When he got there, he said, he could have said, hey, look at how bad I've been treated. Look at what Stalin has done to me, and look at what Germany did to me. But instead, he said that he was going to be accountable for himself. And one of the things he did in trying to be accountable is he thought about when he was sent by the Communist Party to take the kulaks, which were basically a poor group of farmers, and move them off their farms. You see, Russia had a collectivization period of time. And any time in communism or socialism, at some point in time, you have to take people's property because you're trying to take over the means of production. And when you take over the means of production, you take somebody's property, somebody's going to complain. And when they complain, you got to shut them up. Right. So what they did, his job was he gathered up 10,000 families, 60,000 people, and he took them to Siberia. He said they all died, every one of them.
Oh, my.
He said, why did I do that? And this was the answer. He said, because I was a communist. And he said, as a communist, he said what he was willing to do was he began to see groups as good or evil. The Communist Party was good in his mind. And these kulaks were evil. They were property owners, even though they were really just a little richer, poorer peasant, right? They were a part of the poor peasant class, but they were a little richer than the other peasants that were there. Each of us have that. Now, we watch all the time what's going on with the alt-right. And my own opinion on the alt-right is that we need to stand up to the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers and others.
I hate to interrupt, but terminology for the folks out there that are not political scientists, can you put alt-right in a nutshell?
Yeah, alt-right. First, the alt-right identifies themselves. So the alt-right tends to be groups like the Proud Boys, Incel, Oath Keepers. They're a group of people who tend to believe that that they've been oppressed. They've been oppressed by the liberal elite or by the liberal media or by woke culture, any one of a number of other things, that they've been oppressed, and they believe that they should be more of a superior race, or that they should have a superior position. They call most other Republicans cockled Republicans. That's their term, not mine, meaning they've been adulterated and that they've sold out. And so the traditional values that Republicans have, which may be, religious values or fiscal conservatives, they disregard those. They're more interested in the race issue. Now, when you go to this far left, the woke culture, you'll find what they're trying to do is turn the totem pole on its head, right? It's the same concept, but they identify people based upon who's oppressed and who's the oppressor. And in their mind, the white patriarchy has been the oppressor, right? And so they judge people based upon that. So you'll hear things like the word white privilege, right? Now, look, I'm 62. I'm at a great period of my life. All my kids and grandkids are going to do well. They're going to go to good schools. I worked my way up from nothing. They don't have any idea where I've come from. But if you use that word with me, it isn't going to have any.
But you're a white guy, as am I. Actually, part Cherokee though.
But it will have an effect on the coal miner in West Virginia. And what you do, you use that word to shut them up because they don't know how to argue back with it. And when you shut somebody up, they don't just disappear. I mean, they may think they're invisible, but sooner or later somebody comes along and says, I hear you. I see you. The woke culture is harming themselves. Now, again, I'm going to go to my own accountability.
Now, are you saying, just so I understand here, are you saying that the MO of the woke culture is to shut people up?
I think that the goal of woke culture is that there's a fundamental belief. By the way, the woke culture, just like the alt-right, is a hard definition, right? You asked me about the alt-right. I told you that name came from the alt-right. But there are other people who might say that they were alt-right that wouldn't necessarily describe themselves in the same way. And I think woke culture, it's fair to say that as well. So we're using generic terms that have been utilized by social scientists. One of the other terms they use is politically correct. Well, now social scientists are separating politically correct empathetic people and politically correct authoritarians. Politically correct empathetic people might be somebody that says, hey, I think that it's not right to call someone the N-word, or I don't think that it's polite to call somebody a name that they don't want to be called. A politically correct authoritarian, many of their leaders will have what's called the dark triad of personality traits, but they're more intent on utilizing people's reputation to try to enforce their will. And really, what are they after? Same thing as the alt-right. They believe that there's an oppressed class and there's an oppressor. They buy into postmodernism or post-structuralism, even if they don't know that they do, even if they're not aware of the philosophical roots of where they're coming from. But this concept says that you gauge people based upon their color. And because they believe they've been oppressed, they think that you need to turn the totem pole on its head. So you turn the totem pole on its head by beginning to create your own language. And part of creating your own language is trying to gain control over the other person. Now, again, it's not going to work much with you and I, right? We've had a different level of success. We have a podcast. We're used to talking. We're used to being in debates or discussions. But there are a number of people in America who just aren't as well suited to be able to have those debates. And in those cases, it's harmful to them. Now, again, before I'm too far down on that group, I do want to finish something about myself. So my brother and I go out running and we get into an argument, and I don't remember what the argument was about. But I asked a question. I didn't ask a question. I was kind of snide. I said, "What'd you get that on Fox News?" Right? It made him mad, and we didn't talk for about a month.
Right? Oh no!
All right, now here's a couple of points. What was I really doing when I said that? I was probably saying you're lesser a person because of where you get your information.
More than likely, huh?
That ain't right. That's wrong, right? I shouldn't classify him. I should give him the same dignity that I would expect for myself. I should see him as an individual with his own ability to think and to be able to reason. And where does it matter? What does it matter where he got his information?
But
right?
I have a question for you, though. I mean, help me out here. Are you saying that was inappropriate to say, where'd you get that Fox News?
I think that it was inappropriate because of my intent and because I hurt his feelings.
Because of your intent. Gosh, I just don't know. I have such discussions with my family ad nauseum. I had one with my son the other night. We had such a discussion, and he pointed out something I said, and I said, are you saying that in my own house, and we have a great relationship, we don't yell because none of us are deaf. We just talk. And we do have positions and disagreements and things like that. But I said, is it your belief that there are things inside of a person's own home that they should not be able to say? And he said no, and we went on and talked to that. But my point here is psychologically, the way I look at that is it matters more how you decide to hear something than how I decide to say it. Number one. Number two, yes, there are things that are impolite and I should not say. I do not believe, being raised by my dad, who taught us to speak courteously to people and to show respect. My dad would say, be careful how you treat people on the way up because you'll surely meet them on the way down. Treat everybody with courtesy and respect. However, psychologically, I have a problem truly clinically, teaching people to farm out their free will on how to think about stuff to the words coming out of another person's mouth. Should you say things that are discourteous? No, you shouldn't say that. But as a human, I'm not going to base my self-concept on you overtly criticizing which TV station I listen to.
The first issue is this. He has to be accountable for himself, and I have to be accountable for myself, right? So my role was I said something that insulted him, and I didn't need to do it. And the answer was I needed to see him more as an individual and less as part of a group. I believe that's true.
Or did you say something and he chose to take insult at it?
And I think there's a little bit to both. Now, the whole idea of safetyism, I oppose it, right? I think that it is, I think one of the things that we're challenged by in society is that, my generation raised a group of people who are now raising a group of people who are terrified of letting their kids go out in the front yard or letting them hang out in other places. They keep them more isolated. And oftentimes I think they're telling them, hey, I'm worried about you getting kidnapped or I'm worried about you getting hurt. All of which raises their anxiety level, all of which raises their fear level. We shouldn't be surprised by the time they get into college. There's a great book, by the way, on this called The Coddling of the American Mind. But the point is, we begin to create this person that has a high level of anxiety, and then we send them off to college, and then the expectation is the college should make you safe. Well, of course, we all have a right to be safe, right? But that's not the same thing as dealing with people who have different opinions than we have. The idea that you listen to people who you don't agree with, that you're willing to talk to people who you're not on the same plane with, one, it's going to help the overall conversation for our community better. I definitely believe in free speech and the free marketplace of ideas. But two, it's going to help you build up resilience as well. And as you build up that resilience, you become better at being able to deal with problems. Now, that's our fourth ideal. Again, Emily is a psychologist, Dr. Bash is a psychologist, and what's one of the things that she's seeing, which are people who do not have the skills to be able to deal with conflict because they haven't had to deal with them. So I don't think that there's a problem with people having a discussion or a debate. I'm fine with people trying to make certain that we treat people as individuals and that every now and then I put myself in check. But that's not a reason to stop a discussion. Having those discussions and building up that resilience is incredibly good, not just for society, but it's good for the individual who oftentimes has a difficult time hearing it.
Well, I completely agree. And I'm not a political scientist. My thing is neuropsychology, forensic psychology. But to me, and by the way, I don't even watch the news. Intentionally, I don't watch the news because it just doesn't have anything to offer me that I find valuable. If I want to find something, I'll look it up. But I don't need somebody digesting information and sticking it like a baby bird into my mouth. But my point was that it just seems like a very dangerous thing to develop this cultural movement where we cannot sit and have a discussion and I can state my position and try to support it with evidence. And I have a colleague that really woke me up on this, and it was quite a Twilight Zone experience. He said the words woke culture. I did not know what that was. He explained it to me. He shared some of the really out there, and you can fill us in. I don't even remember some of this stuff, but I just remember some of the stuff he told me sounded like a science fiction movie. It was so far out there. And I said, well, but we just need to have a dialogue. And he said, no, you don't understand. Folks from this field of thought do not want a dialogue. They just want you to shut up and go away. And I think that is one of the worst ideas as an American citizen that I've ever heard, because my belief is I may not agree with you, and I'm sure if we talk long enough, I'd find many occasions to not agree with Paul, but is that not what our country was founded on, is the free exchange and kind of juggling of ideas?
Our society was based on originally the empowerment of the individual. I mean, if you really go back on it philosophically, here's what you would find. If you look at Martin Luther, if there were no Martin Luther, there'd be no Reformation. If there'd been no Reformation, there'd be no individualistic societies. He had this belief that man had the ability individually to talk to God or to meet God through his mind, and that he was deserving of dignity, and that there was no church that should have the right to stand between God and a person. Now, Jean Rousseau and others began to take that idea and they made it secular. They said, hey, that's not just important for God. We want to talk about it from a governmental standpoint, that government has an obligation to treat each one of us equally. So when the words were written, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and they're endowed upon by their creator with certain inalienable rights. It was based on that concept that each of us have this right of dignity and that we should all be respected from an individual standpoint. I spent a lot of time in government. I've seen great things that government has done. We built bridges, roadways, we even put men on the moon. But I can tell you the single greatest thing our government ever did was it empowered the individual over itself. By doing that, we've seen a great many things that people have been able to accomplish, not under the thumb of an oppressive government. The whole individual concept, by the way, people on the right and the left believe that. There's a little different version on the right and a little different version on the left. But people who believe in those rights that are based upon individualism are really bipartisan. However, the alt-right, and let's call it the woke left, they don't quite buy into that same concept. They see people more as a part of a group. Now, if you believe that people are all individuals and worthy of dignity, then you also have to agree that they should have the right to be able to speak, to talk freely about their ideas. Now, interestingly enough, we spent about 200 years doing that, and sometimes it's messy, sometimes it's uncomfortable, sometimes those conversations are terrible that we watch in the public sphere. But if you really look at the arc, we actually get someplace from it. We begin to find a more common ground. There's no problem with the right, the alt-right, and the woke left giving their opinions. There's nothing wrong with that at all. They should have the right to be able to do so.
Absolutely, without a doubt.
But we should also have the ability to understand, hey, where is it that we're really differing from them? Because the point of differentiation is that We look at society and think that each individual should have that right, which is why we believe in free speech. Make no mistake, those two groups don't believe in free speech. That doesn't mean that they shouldn't have the right to say it. They should. And then the rest of us, the way that you resolve the problems of free speech is more free speech.
But wait a minute, though. These are political groups living in the U.S. under the Constitution, enjoying the Bill of Rights. How can they not believe in free speech?
Well, that actually goes back to a number of their philosophical roots. But once you begin to buy into that it's the group or the that your job is to protect the collective, then what happens is free speech can become damaging to the collective. And so the argument, and by the way, this was an argument before Western liberal democracy began to be formed. Monarchs said, no, you can't have free speech, because if you have free speech, I'm doing what's in the best interest of most people. And if you start speaking up, you're going to damage the ability to do that. So the far right, they want to shut people up. The alt-right want to shut people up. The woke left, to give you an example, Ann Coulter speaking on a college campus, Bill Maher. I disagree with both of them on a whole wide variety of issues. I don't fall anywhere near in their camp. But I do believe that you let them speak. And by the way, I think when you do, you end up being better for it. When I was mayor, I had a group, a Ku Klux Klan came into Phoenix, and they were going to have a march. So when they were coming, it was supposed to be 2,000 people. So the question became whether we were going to give them a permit. And my first instinct was, heck no. And then I had a chief of staff who said, don't do that. I was 29 years old, by the way, at the time, but he said, don't do that. He said, listen to me on this. He said, you not only give them a permit, you make certain that there's police protection there to make certain that no one harms them. And you stand up and say, I don't agree with them, but they have a right to assemble just like anyone else does. Once we did that, and it went in the newspaper, and it had me agreeing with it, they had 25 people that showed up.
Oh, my.
Right? If I don't know what the difference would have been had I have spoken up against it, but I know it would have been more. Oftentimes, we create the problem by trying to shut the other person up. There's no real advantage to our society in being able to do that.
Well, hence my coffee mug, by the way. Those of you that are listening and watching, I'll read it to you. It has yellow tape around the periphery, and that is gas tape or government-approved speech tape. Get your roll at your local hardware store. And it says, if you have a hard time shutting people up, try listening to them instead. And we really believe that. I selfishly myself defend free speech, because as nice as it sounds for us to outlaw Paul disagreeing with me, tomorrow it may be Paul's group outlawing me disagreeing with him or someone else. Therefore, when I'm speaking up in your defense and someone else's defense, Bill Maher, Ann Coulter, whoever, I'm really protecting, am I not, my own rights?
Exactly. And again, in the free marketplace of ideas, when they were arguing free speech, one of the things they said is, how do you get to the truth? What is the truth? Well, here's part of what happens. I put out a concept. I say, I think this is the truth. And then you say, whoa, wait a minute. There are a lot of problems with that. Let me tell you what the problems are. And then I say, well, yeah, but what you're not thinking about is this. And then someone else gets involved and they say something different. And when you get done, by having a variety of different opinions, actually the truth begins to emerge. You can begin to see it. If you were to say to me, how do I get the truth in news? Here's the bad news. There's no one place you can go to get it. That's just where you're going to get the truth.
Most certainly.
I would tell you, if you're watching the nightly news, limit it. Keep it limited. But if you decide to go read the Wall Street Journal, then take a look at the New York Times as well. Listen to a variety of opinions. And by doing that, you'll start to understand the complexities of it. That's why free speech works, because we have the ability to listen to all of those arguments and then discern for ourselves what our own personal truth is and how we see it.
I have a problem with the personal truth. I think that's perspective. Philosophically, I think truth is not something that can be owned, and you've got your truth. What is my truth? If you owe me money is that 2 + 2 = 37. Well, that's my truth. You need to write me a bigger check. Well, I think it's problematic, and I hear that a lot, my truth, your truth, their truth. I think, as the old saying goes, that's opinions, and opinions are like belly buttons. Everybody's got one. Or opinions are like buttholes. Everybody's got one and thinks theirs doesn't stink. But I think that truth is something greater than that. In the free marketplace of ideas, as you speak of, what is it from the woke culture that they're wanting us not to say? And from the alt-right culture, what is it that they're not wanting us to say?
So I'm going to answer that, but I'm going to address your last point first about the truth issue. Truths are not facts. Facts and truths are different, right? Axioms are a little less than facts, and then truths a little bit less than axioms, right? The truth, as when we said we hold these truths to be self-evident, why did they use that word? Why didn't they say we believe that it is a fact that all men are created equal? Because they understood that truths were something that societies adopt. Now, if you're a libertarian and I'm a Democrat, or I'm a Republican and you're a Democrat, we're going to have a little bit different version of the truth because we come at it a little different ideologically. For a society to work, you better have common truths. We hold truths in the United States. Now, if we begin to say there are no universal truths, they don't exist, we're in big trouble. Right? Because you need to be able to pull people together, and people are generally pulled together by a set of truths that we all believe in from a common standpoint. So to answer your specific question about what does each side want, they're really trying to debunk those truths. Right? I could go into each side. I'll do my best for it. You've probably heard of the 1619 Project. I think it's called the 1619 Project.
Vaguely.
The concept is that this country really began during the period of time when slavery was brought here. We didn't begin with the foundation of our Declaration of Independence.
And you're saying precisely in the year 1619?
I believe it was 1619. There's a book that was written on it. The New York Times took it up. Yeah. I haven't looked at it for a while. So
how could they pinpoint that date? We didn't have a we didn't have a country then. It nothing ever declared us as a country.
And a lot of this is tied tightly to the critical race theory. But here's the theory. So all the institutions that were formed, including capitalism, came from that concept, right? And that effectively what happened was that it was all corrupted by the patriarch, the white male who controlled the system. And so they created systems that didn't work. Now, in many respects, it's a way for them to argue why we should get rid of the capitalistic system, why socialism is better, why capitalism doesn't work, right? And it's that becomes based upon the idea that we're all seen as part of a group. You are either the oppressor or you're the oppressed. I don't believe that's true. First, let's start with the beginnings of our country. The Constitution did not mention the word slavery at all. Right? And more importantly, the Constitution was based upon the moral doctrines that were laid out in the Declaration of Independence. Again, this concept that all of us are created equal. Now, interestingly enough, Frederick Douglass, who was a slave, who became one of the leading spokespeople during the Civil War, he stepped up and said almost exactly what I'm saying. He said, no. The South doesn't own the foundations of this country with the idea that they're supportive of slavery. Our founders, he said, were opposed to slavery. By the way, there's some factual basis to that. There were 59 delegates to the Continental Convention. Only 24 of them owned slaves. And even amongst those 24, like Washington and Jefferson, they spoke about its evils. We knew this concept of all men were created equal was the moral place that we needed to go. They were trying to get the Union formed, but it was being formed around a bigger concept.
But you could argue that they must not have believed it because they owned slaves.
Well, you could, but here's what I would tell you. If we don't buy into the idea that all people are created equal, as was laid out in our Declaration of Independence, as was laid out by our founders, what's the justification for being against slavery, right? Slavery was being justified in the South as a collective means. It was helping the collective means of their people because it affected their economy. We look back on it now, I think it's abhorrent. There's almost no greater stain this country ever had because it's immoral. But why is it immoral? Oh, because we believe in truth. There are truths that we believe in.
And that truth is all of us are created equal.
And if you're Chinese and you're in a communist system, those same truths don't exist. If you're in Russia under an oligarchy system, those same truths don't exist. Right? The alternative to who we are isn't nearly as great as they want to say that it is. Right?
I was in China, and one of the most alarming things that I heard just stuck out to me as far as valuing human life and that all of us are created equal. It was one of the people that took us shared that a bus had gone off a mountain, killing dozens of people, and the commentary of the bystanders were, there's too many people in this country anyway.
Wow.
No value of human life.
Back to those kulaks. Those kulaks were poor peasants that the Communist Party wiped out. They just wiped them out. Why did they do that? Well, to begin with, because Stalin saw that the economy was faltering and he wanted to build an industrialized society. They didn't have an industrialized society. Karl Marx had based the whole concept of dialectic materialism on rebuilding an industrial state, and there was no industry there. So he was going to create industry and take it out of the cost of agriculture. So what he did is he said, let's go take the wealthiest farmers, let's take all their land away from them, the kulaks, kill them, just get rid of them.
Oh, my word.
And the other farmers, let's put them into a position where they're collectivized, meaning they have to work on our farms for the price that we say. They spread those farms out, and then they said, okay, now that's going to fix the problem. Well, you can imagine what really happened. Productivity dropped through the floor. Probably about 20 million people starved from it. So they ended up murdering a bunch of people. They murdering the kulaks, so they moved out to the gulags. They ended up starving to death a bunch of other people to reach some idea of a state-run industry that at the end of the day, the productivity of just simply doesn't bear out. It doesn't work. And yet, we keep looking back on this idea of socialism and say, well, it could have worked. It just didn't work because of the way that they did it. But yet there's no example of where it did. Capitalism works because it reflects human nature. I think about it all the way back to the very first person who made fish hooks. And he was great at making fish hooks. He could make 10 a day, right? But he couldn't fish worth a darn. And another guy who was a great fisherman, but he couldn't make a fish hook to save his life. The two of them figured out a way to exchange those goods, and both of them benefited from it. The overall society, the tribe, benefited from it. That's part of what happens in capitalism. It utilizes our nature to be able to create better products. And most of the big problems that we have in society, they're not going to be solved by government over the next upcoming decades. We're going to cure cancer. It's going to happen by the private sector. We're going to create driverless vehicles, which may wipe out the DWI industry and dramatically drop the amount of deaths that are on our roadways. There are so many improvements. I think we're going to extend human life.
For full show notes and transcript of today's episode, go to therapybites.podbean.com.
Individual psychological concepts are very different animals from one another. And while they are often readily observable in the wild, the TherapyBites Art Lab Zoo affords us a unique opportunity to study them in a safe and controlled environment. Welcome to the TherapyBites Art Lab Creature Feature. Oh, good heavens!
Breaking news, T-Ballers. My name is Safari Sarah, and I'm reporting in from this rainforest. And I have a very special message from this tiny little gnat, negative automatic thought, and he has a megaphone. And he is saying, one second, let me hear what he has to say. Okay, I got it. Run away as fast as possible. If it's anything that's uncomfortable or difficult or anything that we don't want to deal with, run away. It fixes all our problems, right? Wrong. No. We're not going to listen to this little guy, so he can just shoo. We're going to welcome Artie here into the creature feature, and he is going to tell us how to accurately handle this situation. So just give me 1 second while I get the scoop from Artie. Okay, so Artie, Accurate Realistic Thoughts, he is telling us that the best way to overcome avoidance, now hold on to your seats, is to avoid avoidance. So if you have something that you are avoiding, go ahead and do it anyways. If you are experiencing anxiety, don't focus on the anxiety, focus on those thoughts that are up here in your noggin, because that is what is keeping you from doing what you need to do. So if you have any catastrophic thinking, like this is going to turn out horribly, I don't know what's going to happen, it's obviously going to not be a good thing, you don't know that. So in order to overcome the avoidance gnat, you heard it here first from Artie, we are going to avoid avoidance. So get out there and do what you need to do, T-ballers. I hope you enjoy the rest of the episode, and I'll catch you in the next one. Thanks for joining us, Artie. Always good working with you, bud.
Thank you for joining us for the TherapyBites Art Lab Creature Feature.
You're listening to Therapy Bites Art Lab, bite-sized therapy for your brain with Dr. Heath and the T-Ball T. The best advice on the net. No copay required.
You're slipping beneath the cushions of your bobble-headed psychotherapist's couch, leaving behind empty, echoing, cushy, comforting, pseudo-psychological claptrap. Moving into a deeper dimension of your own mind, where distorted thinking, hurting, hopelessness, and regret evaporate into clarity, healing, renewed hope, and newfound resilience. That's the podcast sign up ahead. Your next stop, Therapy Bites Psych Secrets.
Hey T-ballers, Doc Heath here in Psychotherapy Duck in Disguise to share with you some reasons hard things are brain healthy. Quack, quack, listen up here. Neurologically, hard things acclimate your brain to difficulty. Number 2, physiologically, they normalize internal physical processes and reduce amygdala, that's your fight or flight system, reduce amygdala activation. And number 3, cognitively, they allow you to program your thoughts away from pseudo-threat quicksand. T-ballers, listen to your psych secret for this episode. Give your brain hard things to do. It'll be healthier because of it and more resilient because of it. Doc Heath and Psychotherapy Duck out. Enjoy the rest of the episode.
Once again, Doc Heath rips the cushions from the couch, dishes the dirt, lets the cat out of the bag, uncorks the bottle, letting the genie escape, and blows the lid off of another of the universe's psych secrets.
Show your T-Ball team spirit and buy your hardworking Art Lab team a cup of coffee, which helps fuel purchases of high-octane equipment and T-Ball tech that get poured back into percolating, highly caffeinated content for you. Just go to buymeacoffee.com and search Therapy Bites.
Here's Heath and the T-Ball team.
But it's going to happen because of that whole idea of people being able to own what they create. And ownership is more than the money. People who like being entrepreneurs, a big part of what they like is just being able to own the concept, to know that they did it, to be able to say, this is what I did from a legacy standpoint that made a difference. When you empower that, when you give that the incentives to work, which is basically government getting out of the way and allowing them to do what they need to do, you dramatically change the overall process and you change the outcome. Steven Pinker writes a great book called Enlightenment Now, where he talks about what we've done to be able to reduce poverty, reduce illiteracy rates, to be able to dramatically change child immortality rates. Overwhelmingly, the world has gotten better. And then you have to ask the question of why. In thermodynamics, there's a theory called entropy, which is that everything works in chaos unless you put energy into making it work. We've put energy through a capitalistic system and a democratic system into making those things work. It's a ton of energy. My challenge with the alt-right and with the woke left, again, I believe they should have the right to speak up and to say their piece. But at the end of the day, their theories don't work. They fail. They do great damage. There are definite violations to the concept that I think our nation was founded on, which is that all people are created equal. But more importantly, I think that if we're not careful, if we allow those groups to have too much control and too much power, we begin to threaten the very engine that created this great thing in the first place. And that's why I'm an optimistic American. I by the way, I don't think they're going to succeed. I think that as long as we have free speech and people can keep speaking up, we're going to be able to.
Well, it dawns on me as a Star Trek fan that the whole collective thing seems very much like the Borg, and the Borg was a collective, and spoiler alert, it didn't work out for the Borg. They kind of, I don't know, they kind of self-destruct and the humans win.
Same concept with Star Wars, right? The whole idea of the Empire.
The evil Empire. It's just too much of a Borg-like concept for me, but I think the Empire works too. But just a few specifics. The whole thing about the pronouns, that seems to be a big thing. You must refer to me by this pronoun. That when that first started, it struck me as a little bit odd. Does that come out of the woke culture?
I would guess the answer to that question, does it come out of them? The answer is yes. At least it comes out of that same level of thinking. Where it really becomes a problem, I tend to have this belief. If you tell me you want me to call you Gary, I'll call you Gary, right? It just doesn't matter to me. Yeah. But if you tell me I have to call you Gary, I have a problem. Right. Yeah. If you tell me that I'm going to put into place government regulations that are going to imprison me or give me grief or cost me my job, or I'm not going to be able to work because I don't call you Gary, then I'm going to have an issue with it.
I think from my position, I just view that a lot of my colleagues would disagree as more of a psychological problem, because my name is Heath, Heath. And you would not believe through my life how many people have gotten that wrong. And they'll say, Steve, no. Heath. Keith? No, Heath. And finally I'll say, you know what, that's close enough. Because who I am and my value and importance as a person is not wrapped up in you getting my name correct. Yes. That's a psychological issue that cannot be solved by making it illegal for anyone to call me anything but Heath.
So that's when we talked very early on about intent. Does intent matter? Look, if I'm trying to be disrespectful to you, that matters. If I'm trying to be respectful to you, but you interpret it wrong, that matters too, right? Yeah. It matters. I'm attempting to try to say your name right, even though I may be saying it wrong. And if you have agency, those things start to bother you a lot less. You know, once you begin to gain and understand your sense of self, and that other people don't determine your destiny, you determine it yourself. Yeah. That the actions that you take are going to determine where you get. And in fact, if you continue to get mad at me because I call you Steve instead of calling you Heath, you're going to cost yourself. It's going to have a negative impact on you. You're much better off to say, hey, let's go on to the next subject, John. And
well, I mean, I'll automatically give you the benefit of the doubt. I think, gosh, this guy, bless his heart, is really hard of hearing, but oh well, that's okay. No worries. He's getting older. He used to have people yelling in his ear because he was a politician. But if Marcus Aurelius would call that air set in motion, the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, air set in motion, and he was emperor of the world at the time, and he did not make it a big deal what people chose to say to him, the emperor, and he could have, but he did not, even though he had the power to do so. And we teach a lot about people saying you're toxic, or you're manipulating, and you're gaslighting, all that, just air set in motion. I would add a phrase, sound waves riding on air set in motion. Think of what's communicated on social media. What's that? Well, that's pixels, literally pixels, a little bar of light in a certain pattern on a page. It's pixels in a pattern on a page. How can that determine who you are? And why should we pass a law against certain arrangements of pixels in a pattern on a page or sound waves riding on air set into motion. Now, you said earlier you're the optimistic American, and I appreciate, as a fellow American, all the wonderful things that the U.S. is doing. But might I point out, as you well know, we've only been at this for a couple hundred years. It's easy to be optimistic during the honeymoon, and I think as a country we're still in the honeymoon, because the Roman Empire that lasted nearly a millennia, well, they didn't crumble from what happened outside. They crumbled from what happened on the inside. And that's where I see America. I think that the most lethal enemy of America is America itself.
It's always true, right? When a nation is beat by an outside power, they oftentimes have the ability to come back, rise up again, and do great things. But when they're beaten from a power within, they go away and turn into the dustbins of history. The Roman Empire, the Roman Republic is probably the better place to start, was a country or a city-state that believed in the whole idea of democracy and a republic. Well, what happened? There's a terrorist that ended up, literally, I think, out of Babylonia, that ended up killing a bunch of Romans. That upset the Romans. And so they set off Pompey to go deal with them. Right now, when they went to the forum and they decided to select him, they knew that they were giving empirical powers to one guy. He beat them. He defeated them. But the Republic was never the same. And finally, Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon and all was ended as far as the Republic was concerned. What we have that's great, what we have that really makes us unique, it is our republic, it's our democracy. It's that it's based on a social contract called the Constitution, and that Constitution is based on the individual. And by us empowering individuals being empowered actually over government, it gives us the ability to solve the big problems of mankind through not one major source, the government, but through tens of thousands of sources. In fact, with the cell phone and technology, it may be through 350 million people. It dramatically expands our ability to deal with improving the lot of human progress. Now, are there downsides to it? Yeah, it's messy. Free speech is a messy thing. You just can't avoid it. It's a messy thing. And some of the things that people will say irritate me, they irritate other people. But in the end, it's through that communication and that conversation that we begin to make things better. It's the way that we begin to see the truth. And just as importantly, it's how we individually get stronger. Because as we listen to ideas that we don't agree with, we begin to become more resilient. One of the biggest challenges I think that we are having is that our politicians have gotten to the point where they think that compromise is a bad thing, where they think that they can't listen to someone in the other party. You can disagree with people. In fact, I would argue that both Democrats and Republicans they're both needed. I'm a registered independent, but I see that the Democrats have done a good job of focusing on programs that people care about. And I see that Republicans have done a good job of caring about things that revolve around the human spirit. I don't want to get rid of Alexander Hamilton or Thomas Jefferson. They both played an important role in the formation of our society. Over time, we will look back on that and recognize that both people brought benefits. So long as we buy into those fundamental concepts of the Constitution that says that the individual is paramount.
Wow, very well said. And kind of circling back to how we started this out with some dinner table conversations, what recommendations would you have for folks out there that have these difficult conversations based on differing politics and differing religious viewpoints, differing ideologies, so that they can have the discussion but maintain the relationship?
T-ballers, time to quit your lollygagging. Get out of the dugout, onto the field, and live the art life.
Well, first, I would tell them you have to start with knowing the truth. And in knowing the truth, be careful what you're watching, right? But if you're watching the nightly news and that's where you're getting your information, then you go have conversations from that. When you meet somebody who's watching the other channel, it's not going to be a fun discussion, right? Because you're coming from completely different worlds. I would tell you, you'll be better off if you do have a conversation if you're watching those two different channels. But it's also good for you to understand that the truth goes beyond that there are lots of great things that are going on in this country and more conversations than just simply what's happening with some congressman who's created some crisis because they lied about things. I was watching the news at my mom's house the other day, and it's like now the third or fourth day that they're on the Santos guy who had lied about his resume. Again, I suspect that's news for like 5 minutes of one day, and we should be on to other issues, right?
Yeah.
But that's not how they work. The second thing that I would tell you is you do have to be accountable for yourself. And in having a conversation, if you want it to be a constructive conversation, listen. Try to understand what the other side is saying. That doesn't mean you have to shut up and not put your ideas out there, but listen. A third thing that I would tell you is focus on strength over safety. I have a granddaughter who was gay, and she ended up in a conversation. She's moved into my house. She lives with me. And she ended up in a conversation with a member of my family who was pretty conservative on Christian values. And he made some comments to her that to her was hurtful. And she came back to me and she says, I don't ever want to see them again. And I said, well, that doesn't work. Look, I need you to go back to them. I need you to listen to them. I need you to try to ask him questions to figure out why he thinks that way. And then it's okay to say to him, I don't agree with you, but I love you. I told her, my goal is not to make you safe. My goal is to make you strong, because you're going to have to deal with this stuff over and over and over again in society.
Yeah.
We have to find meaning. I love Viktor Frankl's focus on meaning. He served in a prisoner of war in Auschwitz. He said that when he was going through the line, that they took 9 people to the left and 1 to the right. And he says, I just fully assumed they were going to kill me. I was the one that was taken to the right. He says, I had no way of knowing my entire family was going to be dead within days. He said they put him to work, all right, with him not knowing what had happened to his family. He had taught logotherapy, and in teaching logotherapy, the concept, it did a great job of reducing suicides, I believe in Vienna, where he was raised. But
certainly.
He said the idea is that you have to focus on meaning. Now, he said there are 3 ways that you find meaning. I have my 4th. His 3 ways were, number 1, it comes from what you create. The things that you create give you meaning. He said, number 2, what or who you love. By the way, he said one of the things that he learned to love in that camp was every day when the sun was going down, everyone would focus on working because they wanted to see that sun dip below the surface. And then they would talk about it when they were going to sleep. He said, we learned to love that one little moment of the sunset. And the third area, he said, was struggle. Now, I add something to that. Service, giving back to other people. I think you can find incredible meaning from that as well. The next item to me after that is, after you get through with meaning, it's understand that you come from a very great background in this country and that it's worthwhile and it's good to be a part of. As you begin to gain those strengths, it's okay when you listen to someone else to express some love. If you want to know what to call somebody from the alt-right or somebody from the woke left, here's my answer to you. Brother, sister, friend.
Fellow American.
You don't have to be mean to them.
Yeah.
There's just no, it's okay. You disagree with them.
I think that we get nasty when we start viewing the information someone else is sharing with us as threatening to us in some way. And there's really no information you could ever share with me that would be a threat to me. Now, if you have a gun or a knife, that's a different story. But words are not guns and knives; they're just words, and it's all wrapped up in perception. And I like to point out that when you're having these conversations and you're disagreeing with each other, maybe do a little bit of thought experiment and think of all the millions of women and men who have died just so you can have that conversation.
That's a wonderful thing to point out, especially when you're in a disagreement.
Yeah.
Because it takes you back down to the concept of the important values of things like free speech. The whole idea of safetyism. I think my biggest challenge with safetyism that's happening on college campuses is that it's not that people shouldn't have the right to be safe, but they're placing that value over other values like free speech and due process and fairness. right?
Well, in what way? In what way in colleges?
When someone says, I don't want Ann Coulter to speak, right? Because she upsets my sense of who I am.
Oh, that's safetyism.
Right, that's safetyism.
Holy crap.
I have a right to be in a safe place.
Oh
right?
my gosh.
And you're creating an environment where I feel like I'm not safe. Now, again, I think that you're better off to listen to Ann Coulter, even though you disagree with her. I disagree with her. But I think that understanding where she's coming from makes you better. Second, more importantly, don't let that value of being safe become more important than the value of free speech or the value of being fair to someone or the value of giving someone due process. Oftentimes, with the cancel culture, authoritarian crowd, they'll go after a college professor. Oftentimes, they're going after liberal college professors because they said something that they interpreted as being bad, meaning that their intent didn't matter. The college professor's intent didn't matter. What mattered was how they interpreted it. And if they interpreted it as bad, then they should have the right to get them fired. You can go back and you can look at those things that have happened on college campuses and extreme unfairness that has happened to college professors where they've lost their job with no due process. Right?
Wow, that's amazing. I'll get into these debates on social media, and I had an individual say, what you're saying is making me feel unsafe. And, well, that's a psychological problem because, number one, folks, listen up, safety is not a feeling. There is no emotion that will tell you whether you're safe or not. Imagine getting on a 747 and before it takes off, the pilot says, now everybody that feels safe, raise your hand. And everybody that doesn't raise your hand, he takes a vote. And if the votes are that we don't feel safe, then we're grounded because a feeling tells us we're not safe. That's ridiculous. You can be very nervous or anxious and be perfectly safe. Likewise, and I talked to my wife about this because I don't think that she has really good situational awareness sometimes. And I'll say, there are bad people in the world. You need to keep your eyes open. There's no feeling that tells you that you are safe. It's not a feeling. It should be based on evidence. And by the way, I asked this individual, what am I going to do? Crawl through your computer screen and strangle you? No. We need to be, all of us need to take charge, take our power back and realize we first engineer our thoughts, then our thoughts engineer our lives. And I just view the whole extremism of both alt-right and the wokeism culture as really disempowering, very disempowering to people.
That was a better description of agency than anything that I said here today.
Oh, well, I appreciate that, and I'll be sure to get you that check in the mail as soon as it shows up. No, I appreciate that. Take your power back, folks. Okay, before we let Paul get away here, I want to thank him for being on the show today. We've learned all kinds of things. To recap it, you just need to replay the episode, grab a pen, piece of paper, write some of this stuff down. I think Paul's dropped some pearls of wisdom here that honestly, I don't think I could compete with a lot of that. I was just amazed with your story about Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl's kind of my guy, and I talk about him all the time. I loved hearing somebody else talk about him. But here at the end of the episode, I'm going to go under the deep, dark recesses of the therapy couch, and I'm going to pull out a super secret question just for Paul. But I have to get some clarification here. See, I looked you up, and I thought that you are a Democratic mayor.
I was a Democratic mayor. I'm an independent today.
Goodness, what happened? Did you get kidnapped by aliens or something? What happened to you?
There were a couple of things. One of the things I remember was there was a guy by the name of John Shadegg that ran for Congress. During the time he was running, I went to an event for a Democrat. The Democrat was what was called the Lyndon LaRouche. And this woman who was the Lyndon LaRouche said, I don't have anything against Jews, but they do control all the gold in the world. So I left the meeting. I called the Republican and I said, hey, would you like an endorsement? I cut ads for him and I got cut out of the Democratic Party, right? The answer was that it was heresy to support a Republican. There were a lot of people who were very mad at me. Now, it didn't end my involvement with them. I became a Democrat because I believe in civil rights, equal rights, and human rights. But I also deeply believe in the free marketplace.
Who doesn't believe in that? Are there actually people, well, I mean, other than the two extremes, that don't believe in what you just said?
I think there are people, but what's more important is this. For me to gain my sense of agency, I just found it easier to not be affiliated with either party. I like what Thomas Jefferson said. He said, I would never surrender the entirety of my thinking to any political party or organization. And he said, if I had to go to heaven with a party, I'd rather not go.
Oh, wow. I've never heard that quote. That's incredible. I completely agree. It's another whole episode, and I'm not a political science, but I just think that our country has maybe outlived the usefulness of two different political parties. And just why don't we just vote for the best person for the job?
By the way, when I ran for mayor, I ran in a nonpartisan election. So you didn't run with the party label. I ran in a 3-1 Republican district and I won, right? The point is that when you don't have to deal with the party label, you do have a greater flexibility. You can run exactly as you're talking. There's differing systems on that, but many council elections are top two. You don't run in a party. Everybody runs against one another. There is no party. The top two vote getters go against one another. There's also ranked choice voting, which does something similar. And there's a movement across the country to create change to implement just exactly that type of change. People who are tired of the political parties and they're hoping for something better from our politicians.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. I saw a roadside sign that said, instead of electing a president, why don't we all just be really cool and be nice to each other? And I don't know. It's kind of strange, some of the things that go on in our country. Okay, here's my question, but it goes back to, I did see somewhere where it described you as a Democratic mayor. Okay, here we go. Let me put on the Artie cam here, and I'm going to go down here.
We journey now with Doc Heath as he submerges with our special guest into the depths beneath the dark recesses of the therapy couch.
Grab my little piece of paper here. All right, Paul, you're in bed asleep, hugging your stuffed plush Democratic donkey. You're in bed sound asleep with visions of voting chads dancing in your head. What nightmare negative message we've all likely heard would really haunt your dreams the most? What scares you the most in the deep
I'll
dark of night?
I'll answer that in a little different way. One of my weaknesses is I'm very ambitious, always have been. Right? I became mayor at 29 years old. I am a CEO of a business. I have a podcast. I'm writing a book. Sometimes that means that I don't give the attention to the people that matter the most to me. My grandchildren, my children, the people who are the most important to me in my life. I forget about the things that are the most important. I hope that I don't keep doing that and get to the end of my life and not enjoy the many gifts and benefits that you get from them.
Very, very well said. Folks, parting today, I'll add on to that by saying you need to consume your news and your politics like you do your chicken. Eat the meat and spit out the bones. And secondly, and I can tell you this from having been in the long-term care industry for about a decade, no one laying on their deathbed ever complains about politics or winning arguments or the House or getting a bill passed. It is or disagreements. I started my company is called Civil Psych Services with a friend of mine, Dominic Messino, and sadly, Dominic had his own TV show for a while. It was called Investigative Discovery, Hostage, Do or Die. He was a big New York City hostage negotiator. And Dominic had a disagreement with somebody, a friend of ours, and this friend shared with me after Dominic passed away, he was apologizing to Dominic for the disagreement. And Dominic said, none of that matters now. Listen up, folks. No matter what you think is a big deal now, when you're laying on your deathbed, only one thing matters, and that's your relationships. Therefore, I don't care what you discuss, what you believe, what you argue about, all that fades away. And on your dying day, the only thing that will have mattered are your relationships. So put your relationships in first place always, 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 and you'll never go wrong. Often in relationships, you can have it your way, or you can have the relationship, but not both. And I'm hoping that you'll choose the relationship. That's what I try to do. Thank you so much, Paul, for being here. It's been a blast. Thank you, T-Ballers, for joining us. Go back, replay, take some notes, catch the other episodes. We'll catch you next time on Therapy Bites Art Lab. Bye-bye, guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Legislative alert. Gas tape, government-approved speech tape, now available at your local hardware store. Friends and neighbors using words and going on about opinions you don't like? Grab a roll and tape that nagging loudmouth shut. Free government-approved speech, free gas, enforced by the Special Offense Assessment Police, SOAP for short. Trouble taping that politically incorrect mouth shut? Just dial 274-8888. That's 2-SHUT-UP.
Therapy Bites Art Lab.
Welcome to On the Couch and Off Our Rocker with Dr. Ima Freudnot, where we review our special guest's Therapy Bites Art Lab episode, Psychomalarkey Scale Assessment Results. That's PMS for short.
Paul Johnson's PMS performance lands him at a preponderantly 97th percentile on the patriotic psychomalogically progressive scale. This reflects his compelling, cantankerously contagious charisma, underpinned by his seemingly stubborn, seemingly steadfast stance on the symbiotic synergy of capitalism and community. Johnson, our jovial juggernaut of American optimism, demonstrates an intriguing, infectious impulse to immerse himself in the choppy, churning waters of divisive discourse, armed only with a life buoy of logic, but a telescope of truth. His belief in the betterment of the USA, despite its current cacophonous climate, is as unwavering as a weevil in a windstorm. In his political pursuits, Johnson dares to defy the despondency dominating our dinner table dialogues, instead illuminating the idea of an idealistic America, where the beauty of differing beliefs is celebrated, not scorned. For this tireless task, I prescribe a hearty 705 milligram EP extra patriotic dose of divisiveness dissolvent in all, coupled with a heaping helping 2300 milligrams IS intracellular dose of Unifyonium. Furthermore, I conclude that a potent, perfectly proportioned PRN dose of intracranial capitalist cortisol would serve Mr. Johnson well in his ongoing quest to quell quarrels and quintuple our quotient of national pride. Dr. Ima Freudnot, Chief Shrinkstigator, Therapy Bites Art Lab.
Grab some of this episode's guest merchandise, specially designed to help keep this episode's message top of mind in your life. Don't forget friends and family members who could use an Art Lab mental boost too. Just go to therapybites.myshopify.com.
Hey, T-Ballers. Thanks so much for being with us today. If we brought value to your day, show us some love by leaving your positive feedback and inviting some friends to listen in and join the T-Ball team.
Government legal gobbledygook. Not intended as a diagnostic or as an alternative to professional clinical treatment. Resources and advice are for information and entertainment purposes only. Brought to you by someone saying things you don't like? Tape that nagging loudmouth shut. Government-approved speech tape. Gas tape. Now available at your local hardware store. TherapyBites Art Lab is not an approved, endorsed, authorized, butt-kissing affiliate of the United States Special Offense Assessment Police. SOAP Police for short. Warning. Consumption of TherapyBites Art Lab content by Kool-Aid drinking, stinking, thinking, social media, pseudo-psychological pushing, wacky woke, anti-free speech, mumbo-jumbo advocates may cause spontaneous internal skull combustion, stomach discomfort, and or laxative effects. Allergy warning. TherapyBites is manufactured in a facility that challenges nutty distortions, processes nuggets of accurate, realistic thinking, and life-affirming beliefs. This is the audio version of the legal fine print. Why are you still listening to this when you can catch the next great episode of TherapyBites Art Lab with a good friend or family member? Really? Are you still there? This is getting silly. Move on to the next psychologically thrilling episode of the best advice on the net. No copay required.
Me eat copay.
Yeah, with Dr. Heath and the T-Ball team. Go ahead, don't be podgoraphobic. Scoot, scoot, scoot. On to the next episode.